Hi, everyone, and welcome to Resource Revolution, the resource management podcast. I'm your host, Christine Robinson, and on this podcast, we will discuss the real life experiences of people in and around the world of resource management. Today, we have Matt Russell joining us. Matt is a senior resource manager at U.S. Federal Microsoft Corporation. Matt has been employed by Microsoft Corporation for over 33 years, holding various roles within Microsoft services, spanning from an individual contributor to leading and managing high-performing technical and resource management teams. For the past 11 years, Matt has been honing his skills and experience in resource management and is currently a senior resource management leader within the Microsoft US federal team, supporting over 350 technical resources. Matt, it is so great having you with us today.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. This is a true pleasure.
Absolutely. We've been talking a bit to prepare for this episode, and it's been really interesting hearing a bit about your background, and I know our listeners will be interested in that too. But I like to get started with, how did you actually get started in resource management? It's always interesting because the way that the profession has grown has not necessarily been formal in many instances. So can you give us a bit of background as how did you find your way here?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you mentioned 33 years. So I should start by saying I didn't plan to be with Microsoft for 33 years. I planned to be with Microsoft 1 or 2 years. I was pursuing a career in law enforcement. We had a local job opening here that my father sent me straight from college. I jumped in and said, I'll just do this for a year or two while I'm going through the application process for law enforcement. So that I didn't expect to ever be in this position. Through the years, as I mentioned, or as you mentioned in the background, I've supported and lived in services my entire career at Microsoft. Most of that has been in either delivery or delivery management. And about 11 years ago, I was sort of tired of what I was doing. And so as a delivery resource and delivery manager, I was more the consumer of resource management. I thought it was very simple, not a whole lot to it. But about 11 years ago, I said, this is a part of the business I really don't know. I think I know it, but let's take a shot, right? So I reached out to my network. I have luckily a very broad network of people, and I have found someone in resource management, said, hey, I'd like to jump in here if you've got a position. They said, sure, but we can't bring you over at the level that you are at right now. So I took actually a demotion to go and learn resource management. And, all the things, it's funny, all of the things I thought I understood about resource management, I didn't. There was so much details, the tooling, the processes, the forecasting, the sales, the pipeline, all these things that go into it. And I have never looked back. It's been 11 years, and I still wake up every single day loving this job, truly loving this job. That's how I fell into it, just curiosity.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I love that story. And I have to highlight, so you actually took a demotion in order to go into the space. And I think that is so incredible. You must have had something drawing you to it, right? In order to take that big of a leap of faith. What was it about it? Were you just so intrigued by it? Was it a person that you wanted to work with? Tell us about what was in your headspace at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just the constant learner. Whether professional life, personal life, I'm always wanting to learn something new, something that I really don't know a lot about, and I'll jump in. Personally, from things like I bought a welder a couple of years ago, and my wife said, "Well, why a welder?" I said, "Because I don't know anything about it, and I would like to learn it. I really and get my hands dirty." And it's very similar in my professional life. It is something that I was so curious about it, and I would see just little bits and pieces, and some of the process. I'm a very process oriented person. I said, this is a part of the business I just really want to learn. And so, yes, I did in my network. I did go after a position from, a leader that I knew in the past. We had worked together. but that really wasn't the contributing factor there. It was just very, very curious about, again, just broadening my knowledge and my skills, and that's how it got. That's what interests me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think the curiosity bit is worth highlighting. And I'll probably come back to this as we recap, because one of the things that really sticks out across the board from a resource manager perspective, when you think about what profile are people hiring for when they're looking for resource managers, it's sometimes very difficult because there might not necessarily be a resource management function in an organization where, someone's coming from, or they might not necessarily have that background, although that is changing in recent years. I love this idea of curiosity. That's something that I do think is a common thread with successful resource managers. They have that curiosity, and in my view, you have to have that curiosity, because if you weren't naturally curious, you probably wouldn't go very far down the road within this profession, given the very different scenarios that you find yourself in. Has that been that way for you? So it sounds like that's what brought you in. Is that what keeps you here?
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, looking from the outside in, previous to my 11 years, I thought this is a pretty easy gig. Looks really easy, pretty simple. Requests come in, you find the people, you staff the people. It is nothing like that, right? It's so much deeper than that. To this day, we're working on some new tooling. Microsoft, big tech company, all kinds of tools and technology. We're still tweaking. We're still building things. We're still refining processes. We're trying to find that sweet spot of maximizing our effectiveness and our efficiencies in what we do. And as long as that's going on, I'm interested. Uh,
Yeah.
if I get static, or stagnant, I'm not interested. I need to move on to something else. It's not like that in this world.
It's interesting. I'd say for our listeners, we have this is I will say the last episode of our season, which is amazing and ending on such a high note. There are certain things that really stick out for me. One being we've had folks on from many different disciplines, totally different career paths, but there are certain things that are similar. And you just touched upon yet another one, which is this idea of almost constant innovation and being driven by that, as opposed to being threatened by it or de-energized by it, right? So I'd love to dive into that a little bit more, because I know that is something that is a little bit difficult to put your finger on sometimes. But I would say, I'd love to hear any examples that you might have, but I imagine that each day is somewhat different, right? You come in and you certainly have a plan, and you're dealing with things. And a lot of times the things that resource managers are dealing with, they don't have a blueprint to solve, right? They're having to kind of invent that. Is that something that you find, and how does that make you feel? Because I have certainly experienced in my own personal experience, this idea of figuring out the puzzle, right? You have this kind of jigsaw puzzle, you put it together, and then it falls apart. And so if you're the type of person that gets very stressed by that, you're probably going to be very uncomfortable and I would think upset most of the time if this is the type of role that you find yourself in. But again, my experience has been within accounting firms. And so again, Microsoft is a completely different animal. Tell us about that experience from your standpoint.
Yeah, the puzzle analogy is perfect. You have this plan. You go in with, okay, I've got these pieces. I'm gonna solve this. I'm gonna take care of this today. It all looks great when you first start the day. It will very quickly fall apart in this world. And you're right. You have to, if you're someone that um, overly concerned or anxious about changes and things on the fly, running on the fly and working out like that, this is probably not the greatest place for you to be. I used to say, and I still say it sometimes, it's like, let's put it in perspective. We are not doing heart surgery here. We are not right in the middle of an operation or a procedure. It is not a life and death. Okay, it is very important. Yes, resource management is critically important, but let's take it for what it is. Let's just be calm. Let's just think through it, talk through it, leverage the network that we have. because there's one thing that's constant here, and that's change at Microsoft. It always. So you have to embrace that. You have to accept that and say, all right, well, it is what it is. How are we going to deal with it? What do I need to do to deal with it? So I'm very calm. Um, Many people say, I don't know if you're alive or not, or do you have a boss? I am. I just have to roll with it and
I love
do
that.
the best that you can.
I think that's a really great perspective. And I would respectfully challenge you on part of what you said, which is I actually am my personality. I am not calm. I'm not a calm person. I know that's shocking based on the speed at which I speak. But I would say that I am generally, I'll get stressed out. I'll have these things happen. And so I actually think, to your point, it's actually what you do with that, right? So when those things happen, if you're naturally a super chilled out person that's going to roll with the punches, that's great. If you're someone who's going to let that spike your stress level, I think that's still okay, but it's what you're going to then, how you respond to that situation. So I would venture to say, if you're more similar, if you're more in the Matt camp, that's one thing. And wow, I'm jealous. If you're more in the Christine camp in terms of where you are with your energy level and your stress capacity for that type of thing, I almost feel like that helps me in a strange way. It's like I'm fueled by it. I like the idea that I'm in a job that things are going to happen, right? And yeah, it's a little bit stressful, but in the back of my mind, I like the idea that I have to solve the problem. I like that it's a problem that needs to be solved, and I'm excited to figure out how to solve that. So, linking that back to one of the things you said earlier related to it's and to quote you said it's deeper, right? It's not resource managers know that it's not just staffing, it's not just scheduling, it's not just like putting, little things into, where they belong. It's something much more complex. What has that been like for you? And I guess it'd be very interesting to hear how that evolved for you over time, because I imagine with your tenure at the organization, it probably was different, certainly things that you were dealing with at one point versus things that you're dealing with today. But more importantly, for those that are listening that are either not yet at that point in their resource management journey, or people that are not resource managers but want to understand what resource management is actually all about, you have had that experience, right? So you stood on the other side looking in and probably had a certain perception of what this was. Is there something more? Is there something that surprises you about that? And what are those deeper things? Let's talk about those.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there. Excuse me. As I mentioned, look from the outside looking in, and I remember I attended one of the symposiums
Yes.
a couple of years ago, and one of the things that I sort of walked away with is many of the consumers of service of the resource management service think, well, you just staff, you
Mm.
you staff. That's what you do. Um, and that's really my experience 11 years ago, frankly, when I got into this role. Um, was it requests come in, click a few buttons, talk to a couple people, and that's it. And over time, yes, that's evolved, thankfully. And one of the things that I've done in this position over the last few years is to think about, we talk about strategic resource management, strategic staffing. You hear it over and over again. The reality is, we didn't do that 11, 12, 13 years ago. We didn't do it. Um, that link into, so when I talk about it being deeper, yes, you could click buttons and make things happen. And you're going to continue to react. Some people love that type of a role. I don't. I'm a planner. I like to look 3 months down, 6 months down the road and figure out, hey, how are we positioned, right? Are we lined up with the business needs? Where's our quality? Where are some of those skill gaps? And so, and part of that is not only joining and connecting with the sales entity, the delivery managers, but I also found that many of these other roles are starving for information. They need more information. And so I've been on this path recently over the last year and a half or so around how can I help the delivery managers and the sales resources understand how critical it is for planning, for forecasting, for pipeline, and then giving them some tools as well through Power BI. So again, I sort of picked up Power BI because I didn't know anything about it, and I said, well, hey, maybe we could do something here. And so now we have these kind of neat Power BI things that enable the business leaders, whether they're delivery, sales, it's a forecasting, capacity management, all using the same materials, if you will, same resources. And so that's what I talk about deeper. You can make this a pretty simple job. But is it a career? I mean, I think there's that opportunity to say, is it a job or is it a career? And if it's a career, then really, how do I grow and develop? How do I continue to push the envelope? What are those things? So that's what I mean by a little bit deeper.
That's fantastic. I love where you're going with that. And resource managers that are listening to this, you should ask yourself that question. Is this a job or is this your career? That's very impactful, Matt, and really speaks to that deeper layer, right, of what are the value add drivers that we're bringing as resource managers to our organization. How did you figure that out? So was that very clear for you? Did you sort of have to do some investigation? Was there a theme? How did you take us through that? You have some things clear that you brought to the table, right? Things that you maybe tinkered with on your own and experimented with that certainly sounds like they've been successful. How did you figure that out?
Honestly, it's because I was bored when I first started. It was boring
Mm-hmm.
when I started in resource management, and I thought, is this all that there is to it? Um, Again, clicking buttons, requests come in. It's this endless, hundreds and hundreds of requests in the area that I work in. And I said, there's got to be more to this. And I can either keep doing what I'm doing, or I can figure out other ways to motivate myself, keep myself interested, and as you mentioned, you know, deliver that value add back. There's no true value in clicking a few buttons, and I don't mean that in a bad way. That's sort of the end of the road when you click the buttons and you're done. But it's all the other stuff that really interests me. And again, it was out of honestly pure boredom. The first couple months I was in the role as an IC, and remember, I led and managed worldwide resource managers for years before that. But as I became an individual contributor, is what we call it, IC, resource manager, I was bored after a month. I said, "This is too easy. It shouldn't be this easy. There's something wrong. There's nothing here that's really keeping my interest." And so I started just playing around and say, "Well, let's try to connect some dots. What is that value? How can I allow others to get that aha moment about what is resource management? What's the value here?" And that's what's been going on over the past year and a half to, well, actually almost 3 years. And I'm still looking and I'm still working on things to say, I, we're not done. It's never perfect.
Yeah.
So it was just out of honestly just sheer boredom. Um,
That's really interesting too, because so I'll tell you what I just heard from what you described. We talked about this curiosity, which is by nature, many individuals that find themselves in the resource manager role or resource management leadership role. Let's be real, they ended up there somehow, and I do believe that curiosity is a big part of that. But it's interesting because, as you described, keeping yourself interested, I see a direct linkage to that. It feeds your natural curiosity anyway, right? So if the role isn't currently as strategic as either you believe that it could be, or you think it should be, or maybe it's very strategic already, but you want to improve upon that, keeping yourself interested is something that it's a great takeaway, for people that are listening is your job keeping you interested right now as a resource manager? Are you waking up and actually interested in something that's happening or what you're about to uncover? And it's interesting too, because when you think about feeding that natural curiosity, whether that is exploring a new tool, presenting data in a different way, making new relationships, whatever that might be, not only does that feed your own natural curiosity and therefore elevates your own level of job satisfaction, but really it also elevates the role and it makes what you're bringing within your organization as the resource manager more strategic, right? So it's kind of a win-win for everyone. And it certainly sounds that was the case for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a circular thing that happens. If you want it, if you want it to happen, it's not going to fall on your in your lap. Um, so you've got to think about it. And again, it's just this drive to always think uh, it's never going to be perfect, but how do we keep driving toward perfection? Knowing we're never going to get there, we won't. It's never going to be perfect. What we did 5 years ago, we thought was great. Now it's better. We're just going to continue. And you want to, at least for me, that's where I kind of get my energy. Yes, I'm kind of laid back person, but inside, that's what pumps me up.
Yeah,
It may not act like it, it may not sound, but it is. That is what pumps me up to say, come on, we can do better than this. Right? What can we do? Can we just get a little tweak there, a little tweak there, and just keep driving for that perfection? That's it. That's what keeps me motivated.
absolutely. It's interesting then to think then about not only what you described in terms of what keeps it going in terms of your level of interest, but really looking at it from the other perspective, what folks are then getting out of resource management and the delivery, right, of that service and process throughout the organization. But there is the other side of it. It's not always easy. It's not always simple. Let's dive into that. Have you experienced challenges in, I'll say, resource management in the most general sense, but our listeners are in different roles within RM, different levels of maturity in terms of their own process within their organization. Some of them are starting a process and coming from a place that has been very established. And so that's kind of a different thing as well. What has that been like in your experience? You've been within the same organization, but you've done a lot of different things. Tell us about those challenges within resource management and how do you overcome them? And specifically, I think our listeners would be very interested in challenges in demonstrating the value of resource management, which is something that you've done actually very well.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yes, there's always challenge. Sometimes it's something that you can't control, but it is a challenge. For example, not having the proper capacity, not from a lack of planning and understanding, but sort of watching it unfold in front of you. Um, and there's restrictions, let's say, that we can't hire. The business cannot hire. Okay, I can't change that. I can't make that decision. But you see the train coming as a resource manager, and you almost feel like, oh, I'm helpless. I can't influence this. In fact, that actually happened about a year and a half or 2 years ago. We saw it. We sent up all the warning flags. We said there's going to be a big problem. It happened anyway. Um, so what did we do about it? So we started thinking about, all right, we need to get out of our mainstream thinking and kind of look at other options, look at other ways that we can address these capacity issues. And lo and behold, we were able to do that. Now, it did not, I'll be honest, we did not fully close the gap on capacity. But looking back on it to date, I was just looking at the numbers the other day. To date, I think we've closed that gap by about 17,000 hours of
Wow.
delivery.
Wow.
And it started with small. So what's the value, right? You're asking about. That's real value. That's hardcore value when we show up at the MBRs, our MBR monthly business reviews. and keep highlighting, hey, we're making a little progress. And I remember one of the MBRs, I think we announced, hey, we've got 600 hours of capacity that we found. Wow, 600 hours. And some were like, so what? I said, every little bit counts. Every little bit. And we have chipped away at this over the past year to about 16,000, 17,000 hours. That's real hardcore value. That's value to our salespeople who sold the deal, to our delivery resources who we've had to kind of tap to a little higher utilization and kind of give them a little bit of relief. That's hardcore value, I think, is about that impact. But ultimately, it's the customer experience. That's why we're all here. So again, it's about where you're sitting as to what value you can derive from that. But that's just one of the real recent real world examples. We've had others like it where our marketing team decides there's this great idea, this great program that they want to announce to the world, an offering. And we go through forecasting like, oh, it's not going to be a big deal. We're expecting maybe 50 requests over the next 6 months. Short term, 1 week deliveries, 50. Okay, good. So we'll start ramping up on that. Well, lo and behold, I can't even remember the number. I think I was dazed by it. We actually had 8,000 requests, 8,000 requests for the
What?
delivery. And I said, what happened during the forecasting process? Now what do we do? We can't service all of this. And so a lot of different things had to happen with the process, extending the program, and some different things. And we actually recovered it. It took us about 9 or 10 months extra to be able to recover that. But those are the kind of things that are challenges and things that we couldn't control. But you have to act, right? You have to take the action. You have to figure out ways to solve the problem.
What a cool story. I love that. And a couple things coming out of that, right? So one is, how cool is that to be a part of as the resource manager? I mean, that's the exact feeling that really is so motivating for so many of us that are within this field. Is we know what that feels like. Sometimes
Yeah.
it doesn't always work out and you're still kind of chipping away at it, and you've got all these requests coming in and people are upset and there's many different preferences that you're juggling and things don't fit perfectly together. But when it does, it's really, really cool and it's really impactful. So thank you for sharing that with us. And part of that really sticks out, and I have seen as something that has been a challenge for many resource management teams, especially folks that are starting to move from that direct contributor doing the staffing into that more managerial role. But even within the more junior levels of resource management, you still have a bird's eye view over whatever your population happens to be. And I don't think we celebrate our wins enough. And I'm not sure that resource managers know how to or when to promote some of that. And it's not really about celebrating your own win, but it's about highlighting the strategic value that was delivered and quantifying that. So one of the things that really stuck right out as soon as you started telling that story was the quantification of that information, and really sharing that within the appropriate context of what's happening within the organization, right? That's why it matters. You're telling a story with that information. So tell us about that. This is clearly a skill that you've had to hone over some time. I'm certain it wasn't, your first day of work and you marched in and produced your own, special analysis. So would love
Right.
to hear about how data analytics, how important is it? How do you use it? Tell us about that.
Sure. Well, I will say first, you're right. I don't think we celebrate our wins. Usually, we hear about all the things that go poorly, go wrong, and we do have to take time to recognize the things that are happening. When you talk about data and analytics, I mentioned earlier that especially in the delivery management side, even in sales, they generally don't have a full appreciation for, again, resource management, the importance of resource management, and what we actually do. Um, and so trying to build, so I talked about utilization. Obviously, that's one of those big KPIs, right? Metrics that we have to look at. Our time to staff, days to staff, all these aged requests, all of those kind of data points, and they're important. What's more important, though, is how do we tell a story with that data? We have a lot of data here at this company. No shortage of reports, and we love Excel here, of course. Lots of things in Excel, but the point is, it's not about the data, and it's not about hunting for the data, right? The data mining, that's the easy part, going and getting the data. It's about telling the story from that. So why should I care? And it's the quote unquote the so what meaning. What does all this mean? I don't really care. How does it impact me? And it's around putting together that visualization, and that's why I love Power BI, by the way. But putting some visualization to it, showing some trends, showing some different things that are happening, and where maybe some things that are going to intersect might be bad. Again, maybe our utilization is way up. We've got this bow wave of additional requests. There's going to be a problem, right? And so it's about trying to tell that story, not just a table of data, but talking about the story, the trend, and then again, so what? So what do we do about it? What can we do about it? That's what's important about the collection of data. Isn't just about that. It's about how to formulate a story that others, users, consumers of our services can appreciate and respond to in some way, right? What are we asking them to do? What do we want them to do? How do we support each other? And I think that's another one is it used to be this, well, it's a resource manager problem, it's a delivery problem, it's a, right? Part of that whole situation is we're bringing that data together. We're not just networking through data. We're networking on our plans, our collaboration, our how we move forward in a collaborative way. Not that's not my problem. That's your problem, and that's what sort of helps that.
Couldn't agree more, Matt, that you hit the nail on the head with that piece around the storytelling. And I used to call it the headline, right? What's the headline? What is the point of this? Part of that is also knowing your audience. So if you're talking to resource managers, they might have a different perspective than leaders in the business, or perhaps you mentioned marketing earlier, right? That's another data point, and certainly another, let's call it persona, right? Within the organization that you might be interfacing with. And I don't believe that, especially people that are coming up in the profession, understand the value of that. And it's really important to do, but it's important to do it as soon as possible, because you need to practice that and exercise that muscle of being able to extrapolate the story from the data. And there's a lot of data within resource management that we get in terms of reporting. But then there's a lot of data that we don't get, but we actually have access to, that we should be thinking about and looking at and looking for trends. And there are so many tools now. You mentioned a number of them that can help us with that. It's a shame not to take advantage of it. So just a plug there for telling the story behind the data. A lot of times, I also think that resource managers will get requests, and they'll get one-off requests, and they'll say, send me an availability report, or something very, very specific. And I'm not suggesting to not do your job. I'm not suggesting not to give information to people that are asking for it, but rather give them the information, but engage in a dialogue with them, right? Why are they looking for it? Something has obviously triggered that question, right? So are they trying to figure out how they're going to potentially be able to deliver on a new hot wave of consulting work, right? That's coming down the pike. That could be part of it. Have they just realized that one of their team members is ill and they're trying to solve for that? There are so many different things that you could help with if you just understood what they were getting at. But in addition to that, if you are finding yourself shooting over a report, that's fine. Not suggesting don't do that, but share your perspective on it right? So even if it's something as simple as an availability report, I promise you there is a story within that report, right? So there's maybe a certain level of individual that is more available than not. That could be different than it was 6 months ago. That could be different than what you're projecting to have in 6 months from now, right? So tell that story. At a minimum, it helps to really educate yourself about what's going on in the business, but also again, it's as you said, it's every little bit helps, right? So you're chipping away at that inaccurate perception that resource managers are simply doing staffing or it's just about scheduling. It is so much more than that. You also touched upon collaboration. I'd like to explore that because I think it is such an important topic. Tell us about why that matters, how you see that manifest itself within your own experience, and anything else in that category. So strategic staffing, any fundamentals related to interacting from that standpoint. Let's talk about those.
Yeah, I mean, I really value collaboration, and it's not a cliche thing. Um, I don't believe that there are the walls that sometimes people or businesses or organizations put up to divide ourselves. And I put it pretty simply. I said, we all work for the same company, right? We have different functions. We have different targets, different priorities, but at the end of the day, and how collaboration I start with why are we really here? Like, what are we about as an organization? And if we aren't here about the customer and the experience of the customer, then we need to find something else to do. And so centering around what we all should be and are focused on, that doesn't instantly create collaboration, obviously. But let's get very focused about why we do what we do and why every function is important. And if something doesn't happen, something else doesn't happen. From sales on through to delivery, resource management included in that process. And we can chase numbers, we can chase goals, the end, all of this, but are we really impactful to our customers? And I can tell you that if we are siloed, if we do not work together, the customer will see that right away. It will be so obvious. And we don't want to have that. We don't want that to be our sort of our legacy of how we deliver our services. So it's about that, and it's about I take on things that maybe my delivery manager would generally do, and I'll say, you know what, I've got this. You go worry about this. So it's that give and take, and that's really what helps build that network too. If you need a favor, you call in a favor. That's how it works. But you have to be part of the team. If you're not part of the team, good luck with trying to collect on a favor. And so again, it's just kind of rambling there a little bit, but let's get grounded on why we're all here. And I'm not here just to do a great job and check off boxes, right? I'm here for something a little bit bigger. And that bigger thing is the impact that we make in the world. And I don't say that, lightly. I mean, we are impacting the world in the things that we do. And so I try to just bring it to that kind of a level, rather than, no, that's not in my commitments or my priorities. That's you. And, let's figure out how we can work the best together and be the best together, not isolated. When you talk about strategic planning, it is so, so critical. And by the way, we don't have this right, by the way. I don't think many organizations do. I'd be surprised to see the numbers, but I doubt it's a very high number. And so that's one that we're constantly after. Again, if we are not strategic in our planning, we will show up poorly to our customers, period. It'll catch up at some point. It may be 5 months, it may be a year. It's going to catch up. So we can either let that happen and watch it happen, or we could do something about it. And that takes that collaboration again, from pipeline all the way through to delivery. And painting again that picture of saying, we realize we have an opportunity. We can either let it happen or make it happen. Which one do we want to do? And that's kind of my approach to it.
Fantastic. I was going to wrap this up by asking you if you had any advice to share, but you just shared it. I can't imagine anything more impactful than that. I would say those two pieces around getting grounded, I cannot emphasize enough how important that is. And I don't care what industry you're in. I come from the accounting and consulting world, very different than the tech side. But at the end of the day, it's really not all that different, is it? Right? We are all here to solve for the same thing. And at the end of the day, when, not if, but when you deal with those conflicting, because this can be somewhat of a contentious job sometimes when people are wanting different things and emotions are always running high when there's client delivery expectations on the other side of that. And we all know what that feels like. But it comes back to that, doesn't it? Of when there's a problem, it's our problem. This is not my problem or your problem. There is this thing that's happening, and how are we going to solve it together? Which, of course, naturally feeds into that collaboration. So I love that. And then the other thing that I would highlight and really, really echo, Matt, what you described is this idea of if, and I quote, if we are not strategic in our planning, it's going to show up for our customers. I love that. And I think that's something that every resource manager needs to hear, because it is so not only impactful, but it's true. It is 100% true. So when you're thinking about the things that you're asking for, right? So when you are out there asking folks to put their schedules in, or to do their timesheets correctly, or to give you what's in pipeline, or to tell you how likely something is to come through, this is not an admin exercise. It's not you checking the box. It's us working collaboratively together to serve the customer. Couldn't have said it better myself. So I love that. Matt, it has been awesome talking with you. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And with that, we will wrap up our conversation. Thank you all for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to hear more episodes.